4 hours. Persian Gulf, 78 nautical miles southwest of Bandar Abbas. The USS Dwight D. Eisenhower, a Nimitz-class aircraft carrier carrying 5,400 sailors and 74 aircraft, receives the first alert. The SPY-1D radar aboard the escort cruiser USS Philippine Sea detects an airborne contact rising from Iranian territory at bearing 047. Speed, 2,100 meters per second. Trajectory, ballistic arc. Classification, anti-ship ballistic missile. The fire control computer calculates impact in 97 seconds. Target, the Eisenhower. But 8 seconds later, the picture changes. A second contact appears at bearing 051, then a third at 044, then 6 more. In 23 seconds, the radar tracks 11 inbound missiles converging on a single point. The Aegis combat system aboard the Philippine Sea begins engagement calculations. SM-6 interceptors spin up. The Combat Information Center goes to General Quarters. The Eisenhower has 89 seconds to survive the largest Iranian missile strike ever directed at a U.S. carrier. But the missiles were not the weapon. The missiles were the distraction. The real weapon was already 14 nautical miles closer, running silent beneath the surface. To understand what is happening, you need to understand how Iran spent 18 years redesigning its naval doctrine after watching American carrier groups dominate the Gulf. The United States Navy has operated in the Persian Gulf with near impunity since 1991. Carrier strike groups deploy with layered defenses. Aegis radar providing 360-degree coverage, SM-2 and SM-6 interceptors capable of engaging ballistic and cruise missiles, phalanx close-in weapon systems for terminal defense, EA-18G Growlers jamming hostile targeting radars, E-2D Hawkeyes providing airborne early warning, and FA-18 Super Hornets maintaining combat air patrol. No regional adversary has successfully engaged a U.S. carrier in combat. Iran studied this reality. Iran studied the geometry, the timing, the sensor coverage, the reaction patterns, and Iran concluded that the American defense was not unbeatable. It was predictable. So Iran built a strike designed to exploit the prediction. The missiles fired at 0314 were EMAD medium-range ballistic missiles, modified with maneuvering re-entry vehicles. Each carried a 750-kilogram high-explosive warhead. Each traveled at Mach 6 during terminal descent. The Aegis system was designed to intercept exactly this type of threat. The fire control computers aboard the Philippine Sea and the escort destroyer USS Gravely were already calculating solutions. The defense was supposed to hold, but Iran did not design the EMAD strike to penetrate the defense. Iran designed it to shape the defense. The real weapon was a Ghadar-class midget submarine, 29 meters long, diesel-electric propulsion, carrying 2 heavyweight torpedoes. The submarine had departed Bandar Abbas 31 hours earlier, running at 4 knots on battery power, holding a depth of 47 meters. It had crossed into the carrier's projected operating area 6 hours before the missile launch. It was now sitting stationary at a depth of 52 meters, 14 nautical miles northeast of the Eisenhower, directly along the evasion corridor the carrier would use when the missiles arrived. Iran knew how American carriers evade. Iran knew the geometry. Iran positioned the submarine where the Eisenhower would go. The visible attack was only the outer layer. One person aboard the escort destroyer USS Gravely had flagged something 9 hours earlier. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Tennant was a sonar supervisor assigned to the ship's undersea warfare team. His job was to monitor the towed array sonar, track biologics, identify propulsion signatures, and log anomalies. At 1,847 the previous evening, Tennant had reviewed a 16-minute recording from the towed array. The recording contained a faint tonal at 127 Hz that appeared twice, spaced 43 seconds apart. The tonal did not match any cataloged surface vessel. It did not match environmental noise. It did not match known biologics. Tennant logged the contact as Possible submarine, confidence low, bearing 064, recommend passive track. The tactical action officer reviewed the log, assessed the confidence level, and took no further action. There were no other indicators. There was no corroborating data. The contact faded. Tenant did not forget. At 0314, when the first missile alert triggered, the Eisenhower strike group shifted to air defense posture. Every radar focused upward. Every fire control system locked onto the inbound ballistic tracks. The sonar teams continued passive monitoring, but the priority was clear. The threat was coming from the sky. No one was thinking about bearing 064. At 315 to 12, the first SM-6 launched from the Philippine Sea. The missile accelerated to Mach 3.5, climbing toward an intercept point 41,000 feet above the Gulf. At 315 to 19, the missile struck the lead EMAD, detonating the warhead 38 kilometers from the carrier. The Aegis system logged the kill and shifted to the next target. At 315 to 24, the Eisenhower began evasive maneuvers. Standard doctrine: hard turn to starboard, increase speed to 32 knots, open the range, complicate the terminal guidance. The carrier heeled to the right, its wake carving a white arc across the dark water. The maneuver was textbook. The maneuver was predictable. The maneuver pushed the Eisenhower directly toward bearing 064. At 315 to 31, Tennant was at his sonar station aboard the Gravely. The towed array was still streaming. The air defense battle dominated the radio net, but Tennant was watching his waterfall display. At 315 to 38, he saw it. The 127 Hertz tonal reappeared. This time, it was stronger. This time, it was closer. And this time, there was a second signature beneath it. A faint broadband transient, consistent with a torpedo tube flooding. Tennant keyed his intercom. His voice was flat. Possible subsurface contact bearing 058, range estimate 12,000 yards. Transient indicates weapons activity. The tactical action officer aboard the Gravely heard the report, but the Aegis system was engaging the 5th EMAD missile. The Combat Information Center was saturated. The TAO acknowledged the report and forwarded it to the carrier. The message reached the Eisenhower's CIC at 315 to 47. At 315 to 51, the Gaudier submarine fired. Two Type 53 heavyweight torpedoes entered the water at a depth of 50 meters. Each torpedo carried a 400-kilogram warhead. Each ran at 45 knots. Time to impact on the Eisenhower's current track, 3 minutes 42 seconds. But the Eisenhower was no longer on that track. At 315 to 49, 2 seconds before the torpedoes launched, the Eisenhower's commanding officer received Tennant's warning. The captain did not have time to verify. He did not have time to analyze. He had 2 seconds to decide whether to trust a single sonar contact from an escort destroyer in the middle of an air defense engagement. He made the decision. He ordered an emergency turn to port, reversing the evasion and pushing the carrier west instead of northeast. The turn saved the ship. The 2 torpedoes ran toward the intercept point the Eisenhower had vacated 11 seconds earlier. At 319 to 33, both torpedoes reached their programmed search zones and found nothing. They entered re-attack mode, circling at 30 knots, pinging active sonar, but the Eisenhower was now 1,900 meters west of the search basket. The torpedoes did not acquire. At 321 to 7, both torpedoes exhausted their fuel and sank. The missile engagement continued. At 316 to 14, the Aegis system aboard the Philippine Sea destroyed the 7th EMAD. At 316 to 29, an 8th missile penetrated the outer defense layer. Its maneuvering re-entry vehicle shifted course twice during descent, evading the first SM-6 intercept attempt. The missile was 19 seconds from impact. The Phalanx CIWS aboard the Eisenhower activated at 316 to 41, tracking the descending warhead. At 316 to 44, the Phalanx fired a 3-second burst, 225 rounds. The missile detonated 290 meters above the flight deck, showering the carrier with debris. 2 aircraft on the deck sustained shrapnel damage. No personnel were killed. At 316-58, the final EMAD was destroyed by an SM-6 fired from the Gravely. 11 missiles fired, 11 missiles killed. The air defense held, but the engagement was not over. At 317-22, the MH-60R Seahawk helicopter from the Gravely reached the datum point for Tennant's sonar contact. The helicopter deployed its dipping sonar at a depth of 60 meters. At 317-41, the sonar operator detected a submerged contact, diesel-electric propulsion, cavitation signature consistent with a Goddard-class submarine, bearing 061, range 2,400 meters, depth 48 meters. The submarine was attempting to withdraw. The Seahawk pilot reported the contact to the Gravely. At 317-53, the helicopter released a Mark 54 lightweight torpedo. The torpedo entered the water, acquired the Gadir's acoustic signature, and began pursuit. The submarine attempted evasive action, diving to 71 meters and releasing a decoy. The Mark 54 rejected the decoy. At 318-24, the torpedo struck the Gadir's pressure hull aft of the sail. The detonation collapsed the engine compartment. The submarine sank in 94 meters of water. There were no survivors from the 19-man crew. At 319-0, the E-2D Hawkeye, orbiting 110 nautical miles northwest of the carrier, detected a secondary launch signature from Iranian territory. 4 additional missiles were climbing from a mobile battery 23 kilometers inland. Target track. The logistics ship USNS Supply, positioned 41 nautical miles behind the carrier group. The Supply carried 2.1 million gallons of fuel and 1,600 tons of munitions. If destroyed, the Eisenhower would lose sustained combat capability within 96 hours. Iran had built a 4-layer attack. The missiles were the distraction, the submarine was the kill shot, and if both failed, the logistics strike was the crippling blow. The strike group had 84 seconds to respond. At 319-11, the Gravely began repositioning to cover the Supply. The ship's Aegis radar acquired the 4 inbound missiles at 319-19. SM-6 interceptors were ready, but the Gravely was now 38 nautical miles from the Supply. The geometry was marginal. The fire control computer calculated a 71% probability of successful intercept on the lead missile. At 319-27, an EA-18G Growler from VAQ-132 entered the engagement. The Growler had launched from the Eisenhower at 0302 as part of the electronic warfare screen. Its pilot, Lieutenant Commander Rachel Okonkwo, had been jamming Iranian coastal radars throughout the battle. Okonkwo did not have interceptor missiles. She had the ALQ-99 jamming pod and 23 seconds of fuel in her jamming window. At 319-34, Okonkwo activated the jammer at maximum output, flooding the targeting frequencies used by the Ahmad's maneuvering re-entry vehicle. The missiles lost their terminal guidance. Their seekers went blind. At 319-49, all 4 missiles shifted to ballistic freefall. One struck the water 1,700 meters short of the Supply. One struck 2,300 meters to the east. 2 collided in mid-descent and detonated 4,100 meters from the ship. At 320-14, the threat board cleared. No additional launches detected. At 321-0, the Eisenhower's air wing executed the counterstrike. 2 F/A-18E Super Hornets from VFA-131 reached the Iranian coast at 0323. Each aircraft carried 4 GBU, 31 JDAM precision-guided bombs. At 323-44, the first strike destroyed the mobile battery that had fired the final salvo. At 324-11, the second strike hit a radar installation 8 kilometers inland that had been providing targeting data to the missile batteries. At 326-0, a third flight from VFA 105 struck the shore facility at Bandar Abbas, where the Ghadir submarine had been based. Secondary explosions indicated fuel and munitions storage. At 0331, the strike group confirmed weapons silence across the Iranian coastal zone. The engagement was over. The Eisenhower survived. The supply survived. The strike group destroyed 11 ballistic missiles, 1 submarine, 1 mobile missile battery, 1 radar site, and 1 submarine base. Iranian casualties were estimated at 19 submarine crew, 14 missile battery personnel, and 31 base personnel. American casualties: 0 dead, 7 wounded from shrapnel on the Eisenhower's flight deck. All injuries non-critical. The Iranian strike was designed to be a coordinated kill. The missiles would force the carrier to evade. The evasion would push the carrier into the submarine's kill zone. The submarine would destroy the carrier, and if the submarine failed, the logistics strike would cripple the strike group's ability to respond. The plan required the Eisenhower to behave exactly as American carriers had always behaved. The plan failed because of one man. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Tennant did not fire any missiles. He did not drop any torpedoes. He did not fly any aircraft. He listened to a 16-minute sonar, recording 9 hours before the battle, and logged a contact that no one else noticed. He watched his waterfall display during an air defense engagement when every other operator was focused on the missiles. He reported a transient that lasted less than 2 seconds, and that report reached the Eisenhower's bridge 2 seconds before the torpedoes fired. The Iranian plan assumed that no one would be watching the water. Tennant was watching. At 0347, after the counterstrike was complete, Tennant returned to his sonar station. He reviewed the towed array recordings from the engagement. He logged the final contact data on the Ghadir submarine: bearing, range, depth, acoustic signature, time of destruction. His log entry for the night read: subsurface contact bearing 058, type 53. Torpedo launch detected at 315 to 51. Submarine classified Ghadir, destroyed by Mark 54 at 318 to 24. Recommend updated threat library for 127 Hertz tonal association with Ghadir battery operations. He did not mention that he had identified the weapon that was supposed to sink the carrier. At 0412, the Eisenhower resumed flight operations. At 0500, the supply began refueling the strike group. At 0614, a classified after-action report was transmitted to U.S. Central Command. The report included a single recommendation: integrate passive sonar, early warning protocols into carrier strike group air defense doctrine. The missiles were supposed to be the visible threat. The submarine was supposed to be the invisible kill. The logistics strike was supposed to be the crippling finale. But the real story was a single tonal signature that appeared on a sonar display 9 hours before the battle, logged by an operator who did not dismiss it, and remembered by the same operator when every other sensor on the strike group was pointed at the sky. That was America's response. Not the SM-6 launches, not the phalanx bursts, not the retaliatory strikes on the coast. The response that saved 5,400 lives was a 127 Hertz line on a sonar waterfall, and the chief petty officer who knew what it meant.